Hi everybody. Thanks so much for coming to our session on science, community organizing, and environmental justice. My name is, I feel really silly with the mic. My name is Jennifer Kunze. I work as a community organizer for Clean Water Action as the Maryland program organizer. So our office is in Baltimore City and we do work across the state, but I mostly focus on our work in Baltimore City and a couple of other counties. And we are here today bringing together a number of people who live and work in Baltimore City and have been engaged on a number of campaigns in different issue areas focused on solving environmental and public safety and public health problems that are affecting people living in Baltimore today. So one has had a successful conclusion to that campaign, but it was a really imperfect partial solution because of some limitations about what the city has the authority to do. One had a partial remedy that we got some legal agreements worked out, but they didn't end up with the actual implementation that we wanted to see. And then one's really focused on building community and capacity and understanding and connections between all of these different issues to be able to solve problems more effectively in the future. So to start with, we're going to take about 5 minutes for each of my friends here to talk about the issues or campaigns or areas that they're working on with the accompaniment of slides. Then, welcome. We'll take some time for a panel discussion among us, and then we'll take questions as well. So if you need clarification or have any sort of quick questions, feel free to interject as we're going, and otherwise we'll have 20 or so minutes at the end for questions and conversation. But to start, we're going to start with Leah Kelly, who's an attorney with the Environmental Integrity Project. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm sorry. I'm Leah Kelly. I'm an attorney with the Environmental Integrity Project. I'll be as quick as possible. I know I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak. So a lot of what we're talking about today is climate change in Baltimore. And I just want to sort of lay the groundwork by sharing with folks that in a lot of ways, Baltimore is an epicenter for the country's climate crisis, both in terms of what is causing the crisis, but also the worst possible effects on our communities. Baltimore is there are a lot of fossil fuel facilities in Baltimore, many gas and oil terminals. A lot of folks don't know this. It is the second largest coal exporting port in the country. Historically, for the last decade or so, the city has been basically ringed by 3 large coal-fired power plants. 2 of them are located to about 2 miles to the south of the city. And then one was located a little bit to the east. The one that's located to the east. The one that's located to the east is now repowering from coal to natural gas, which is another source of concern. The largest trash incinerator in the state is in Baltimore, and a few years ago, the largest trash incinerator in the country was also proposed 4 miles away from the current trash incinerator. And in addition to the causes of climate change, there are also increasing signs of the results of climate change. We've seen a lot of flooding over the last 2 years, including really extreme flooding. And then one of the things that we'll talk about a little bit more is the effect on the city's sewage system. We're seeing increasing flooding in particularly, and this isn't all just due to climate change, but it's certainly making it worse, increases in sewage backups in residents' basements. So I just very briefly, our organization, we are primarily attorneys and data analysts. We provide legal and technical services to other folks. And my role is in Maryland. We do work throughout the state,
But my role has been focused on environmental justice issues in Baltimore for the most part of the last 8 years. And we've done a fair number of campaigns on various issues in Baltimore, in addition to releasing data reports. This is just an example of one of the things that we've done most recently. In 2017, we released a data report on asthma and air pollution in Baltimore, and we mapped extreme asthma events in the city zip code. And for folks who know Baltimore, you look at this map and you're immediately like, worse asthma in the most vulnerable areas and the lowest income and majority African American communities. But we are going to talk about two particular campaigns today. One of them relates to the shipment of hazardous materials in Baltimore. There's rail infrastructure running throughout Baltimore and a fair amount of industry in South Baltimore in particular. And so a number of us have worked on a campaign relating to shipment of crude oil by rail. And this started in 2014. We got a permit we were sent a permit application, a notice of a permit application by a company called Targa Terminals. They were proposing to install a new crude oil terminal in South Baltimore in an area that a lot of folks are probably familiar with called Curtis Bay. And they were proposing to ship 383 million gallons per year of crude oil through that terminal. That equals out to about one train of 35 rail cars per day. And importantly, they were asking to ship what is known as Bakken crude. It comes from the Bakken Shale in North Dakota. And right around that time, folks were becoming more and more aware of crude oil train explosions. When these trains would derail, particularly those carrying Bakken crude, and there was any sort of spark, there would be a major catastrophic explosion. And again, I mentioned we got this application in 2014. The picture on, I guess it's on the right above, is a picture of an explosion of a crude oil train in Virginia that happened in 2014. And then the most well-known event was the picture shown on the left. In July of 2013, one of these trains exploded in a town called Lac-Mégantic in Canada. It completely leveled the downtown and killed 47 people. So the fact that we were looking at a proposal like this in Baltimore really raised a lot of concerns immediately. Okay, oh, sorry, it's a little bit. Okay, and this is another group. I think it was Forest Ethics. They sort of mapped out nationally where these crude oil trains were going. This is Maryland. You can see where they were going in Baltimore. Is there a Baltimore specific? Yeah. Okay. And then this is the Baltimore specific blast zone. And in particular, the sort of the bottom leg here, and Keisha will talk a little bit more about the communities, but this goes through South Baltimore, and these are the rail lines pass very closely through densely settled communities in South Baltimore. And, I think we'll probably discuss this more during the discussion session, but we were able to defeat this proposal for a new terminal through work, with a sort of coalition work that lifted up resident concerns about the proposal, but also legal work on the permit application. The company was applying for a minor source air pollution permit without sort of justifying why they should be considered that kind of a facility. And so the Maryland Department of the Environment put the permit on hold indefinitely. They announced that in 2015. They just said, we're not going to continue processing it without more information from the company. And then the company withdrew their application in 2016. And then following on the heels of that, a number of folks got together and decided, well, we'd like it if the city would just ban these terminals completely. And so that law actually passed in 2018. The city used its zoning power to pass a law that banned new and expanded crude oil terminals. And so there are definitely some unresolved issues relating to that, particularly the fact that Baltimore has banned these terminals, but the trains can still pass through the city. And
unfortunately, only the federal government has the legal authority to regulate these trains. There have been regulations passed. They have a lot of gaps, and certainly I'm fairly certain the Trump administration has been making noise about trying to roll some of them back. And then there's also a lot of, this is a chronic problem with rail issues in general, but there is just a lack of transparency about where any of this is going. Really, really difficult to get a sense of where these trains are passing through and how frequently, based on official records. And then another separate campaign that we've worked on relating to climate change is on basement sewage backups. And this is when you talk about health impacts associated with the effects of climate change. I think everybody probably intuitively knows that raw sewage is incredibly unhealthy, but yes, as explained by EPA, the associated diseases are cholera, dysentery, hepatitis, cryptosporidius, and giardiasis. And these have actually been increasing in Baltimore since the mid-2000s, and that's partly because there was a 2002 consent decree that's a legal settlement agreement among the EPA, the Maryland Department of the Environment, and the city. As part of that, the city was required to try to clean up its waterways because it was previously just dumping all of the sewage into the waterways, but without sort of doing any associated planning, they started just closing off pipes, that were discharging into the waterways, and instead the sewage had no place to go, so it started going into people's basements. And so the increase that the Baltimore Sun found in an investigative report was 622 backups in 2004, and more than 7,500 reported in 2015. I think that 2015 is maybe a little bit more, represents a little bit more than a year, but it's still a huge number. In addition, the city was doing little to nothing to help people with the costs of basement sewage backup, which can be really, they can be really high. A lot of them hover between $5,000 and $10,000 per backup, but they can be in the tens of thousands of dollars. And so my organization did an investigation in 2015 and found that we looked at 413 claims that were submitted between July 1st, 2012 and July 1st, 2015. Of those, the city had paid 9%, 54% had been denied, 37% were open and unpaid, and of those, 122, so almost all of them, were over a year old, so they just weren't being processed quickly. And in 2016, the city, that consent decree, the 2002 consent decree that I referred to earlier, that had to be modified because they were supposed to solve the problem by 2016, and they had not done so. So in 2016, they proposed to modify the consent decree. There was a process where the public got to weigh in. Some folks we filed legal comments along with Blue Water Baltimore, and we did get some improvements in the final consent decree. The proposed consent decree had absolutely nothing to help anybody with any basement backups. And when we raised that issue with the regulators, the EPA and the Maryland Department of the Environment, they told us they had no legal authority to do that, which was nonsense because many jurisdictions throughout the country have addressed basement backups in these consent decrees. And so in the final consent decree, we did get some improvements, as Jennifer mentioned. There are problems with how they're being implemented, but there was an education guide. There are some infrastructure programs focused on basement backups. One of the biggest things that we've been focusing on is trying to make sure that folks actually get reimbursed for these backups. And so there is a new expedited reimbursement program. It's called a pilot program under this new consent decree. There is a $2,500 cap per incident, which is not high enough in our opinion. It does not cover any property loss. It only covers the cost of cleanup. It only covers backups caused by, quote, wet weather events, with no guidelines for making a determination of what is caused by a wet weather event and what is caused by a pipe blockage. most of them are, we think most of them are probably caused by a combination. The program became effective in April 2018, and as of January 2019, the city was denying about 85% of the applications under it. So there is, as I mentioned, it's a pilot program, and there are built-in sort of points where the regulators on the city have to evaluate the program. And so the 18-month evaluation of the reimbursement program is going to take place this October in 2019, and so that is a next step and an opportunity for folks to raise these problems. And so with that, I'll turn it over to the next person.
Thanks, Leah. The next person is Keisha Allen, who's the president of the Westport Neighborhood Association. I can flip through the slides if you'd rather sit or if you want to come up here, either way.
I'm short, so probably better.
Just press the down button on the laptop.
Hi, I'm Keisha Allen, and I'm president of the Westport Neighborhood Association. The Westport community is in South Baltimore, right at the city-county line, but just north of Curtis Bay. And I keep going. Okay, good. Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. There's a map. I don't know if there's a UR here. I can't see it, but thank you. Okay, there's a star. Oh, that's okay. So we're in a very industrial / commercial / residential area. Maybe I'm going too fast. So anyway, we learned about this project back in, I believe it was December 2013, because we were having a holiday party at our rec center. It was a normal meeting, and a gentleman came, I think it was Will. It was Will, came and was kind of doomed our party. Anyway, so we're having good food, chicken, punch, and oil trains. What are you talking about? So at first we were kind of like, okay, well, there's oil trains and these, what you see here, coming through the neighborhood anyway. So this overpass is over a 6-lane span of highway, I-295, that if you come in and out of Baltimore City on the southern end. So, and look up above. So kind of scary. It's like, now that it's brought to my attention, now I used to drive under it, and now it's like, ooh, what if? But anyway, thankfully nothing's happened. So he came to our Christmas party and was talking to us about this, and we were like, okay, what's so different? But I said, no, this is like explosive. I'm like, well, technically it could be explosive now. So like, come back in January when we're like not eating chicken and exchanging gifts and everything. He came back and talked to us, and it scared the daylights out of us. Now keep in mind, we're in a very industrial area, so a lot of things you just get used to dealing with. You get used to living near a train that's loud. You assume that, yeah, a fire could happen. You don't think it could explode and incinerate you before you even know what the heck's happened. So we, took time over the few months to learn more, get to know Will at the time, and of course, you're not going to get the whole neighborhood. When you're in a neighborhood where a lot of people are raising kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, you've got asthma, you're trying to keep them in school, you've got maybe some of the parents coming home, maybe they're in and out of the system, and not everything's negative in my neighborhood, but you have to think about what's a priority to certain families. So, and you can't just take on every bad thing that comes. So, of course, I'm the president. Okay, I guess it'll be me. So me and I think 2 or 3 other neighbors in my neighborhood looked into it a little further, and we just kept bringing information back. Then we start contacting, our state delegation, our council person, and do you know about this? And they really didn't know about it in the way that we know about it. So then I started doing research on Quebec, and I'm like, well, he kept talking about this town, and I looked at it on a map. I was like, oh my gosh, the way Lac-Mégantic is designed with the train running around it. And just the idea of the people in the bar, I think they were singing happy birthday, and that's when the explosion happened. A lot of them died. We're actually in this bar. Sits just as close to our bar in the neighborhood. Not a bar, but a tavern, I would say. So which means you're not just coming and going. You're staying in there and you're hanging out. Everything just gave me the chills. I'm like, this is designed kind of like Westport and Mount Winans. So we just kept going along with all the other issues. Meanwhile, a casino was being built. Meanwhile, there's somebody buying waterfront property. So you have all these things going on. And eventually we met, she may be later in the, Mary Lane Jen is probably later in the, okay.
Yeah.
What is that?
She's-
Mount Winans.
that's
That's Mount
Mount
Winans.
Winans,
Okay. I was gonna say, how they got a playground? We don't have that. Okay, so it was a polar vortex day. It was like February. It was freezing cold. My hands were hurting. And this lady named Mary Lane came down from Quebec and said it was actually colder in Baltimore than it was up in northern Quebec. So we were at the bottom. So this right here, this location is, you probably can't see the train tracks, but there's train tracks running behind there. And where I live about a block away. So yes, I deal with the train noise at night, but I sleep through it now. The cool thing is people don't stay at your house long, house guests, because they don't want to hear that train. So anyway, Mary Lane came and looked around the neighborhood and her jaw dropped. She said, "This looks like Lac Mégantic." Now, remember what I just told you? I said probably about a year or two prior to that. So then I really got freaked out. I'm like, okay. And she was just taking it all in. So we spoke, she spoke some English. I spoke no French, but we understood each other's language just by being in the atmosphere of the train. So she shared her experience and the things that happened and didn't happen and should have happened and should not have happened. It's hard for the government to really prosecute this kind of thing. So we, of course, now you're really scared. But I'm like, okay, well, nothing's happened yet and so forth. And then a few things happened just after that. So anyway, this is, I think, a quote
From your op-ed.
Okay, from an op-ed that I did. Because you would think with the train running through it and it's carrying something crude that most people would either know about it or even care about it. It was just even getting people to care. And I don't mean my neighbors. I mean, well, of course, lobbyists are in a different reason, but whether if it's elected officials, whether if it was, not all of them, whether if it was just residents, businesses, because it's like, let's just ignore this thing that could happen because we don't want to hurt our chances of having decent home values or loss of business, loss of more residents, things like that. So I felt like for a while we were just like talking to nobody. So Mary Lane spoke, what is that place called? It's 2640, it's 40 Space, okay. She spoke to a larger group that night. I think there was a few members of the media there. And I felt like at that point, then we met people from like Bolton Hill, which is the northern end of the city, or at least central area of the city, and start talking to more neighbors. And we just start exchanging information and just working together and trying to keep up with all these bills and legislation, things that we were trying to, I'm going backwards.
You're going
okay.
back. Yeah, press down.
Okay. So there was this huge casino that was built within feet of my house. And this is what they displayed on the side of it. Unfortunately, it wasn't on the side. I think they displayed Westport. Well, we could have saw it. But anyway, it was still, caught a lot of attention from people coming and going. That's probably the end of my part. But so anyway, what else did you want me to share?
Well, just to the hearing.
Oh, okay.
If you keep playing.
Can you tell us who displayed that alternate blast on
Uh,
the casino?
A group called the Backbone Campaign that mainly runs out of DC does these big, massive visual protests and displays a lot. Like during the Trump administration, they've been putting them up a lot on the Supreme Court and so on. And so they lent us a big, theater stage light spotlight with these stencils that you can stick in it and then project it onto whatever building is, in this case, within the blast zone that could be impacted by a crude oil train explosion. So that's the Mount Royal building that's part of Micah's campus, and the train runs basically through it. And so
Literally.
one day at Artscape in I think 2016, we displayed the oil train blast zone message onto that building in front of the 1,000 or so people. That was fun.
It's nice. That's so savage. I love it. Okay, so.
Just whatever. Yeah.
Oh, so anyway, long story short, maybe spoiler alert, we went through a lot of bills. We went through a lot of changes, support, non-support, being bullied. Keep in mind, we all have day jobs, and they come at you, and they come at you hard, and they threaten you. And this is also scary because I'm also one that remember hearing about, I think her name is Berta Cesaros, it's a lady down in Honduras. You start thinking crazy stuff like, okay, I'm just little Keisha in Westport. Like, could somebody really come after me? And then you hear about other activists. Like, it's something about environmental activists that get, and maybe I go down a rabbit hole anyway, but it's like, you can't not ignore this stuff. Like, she's really doing what I did. Maybe, I don't know, on a larger platform, but you start getting scared too. But we just kept fighting and kept fighting. And then more and more support happened through our legislative process. And eventually we did win. Was it end of last year? Yeah, last summer. We did win. It wasn't the original of banning the crude oil because that was really hard to stop a train. It's federally regulated. But what we were able to do is stop them from building terminals because our neighborhoods have the zoning capacity to hold these things. I mean, like Mount Winans, you have the big oil tankers. I mean, we're just that close to it. So it was a way of, I guess, trying to make, it's not exactly what we want, but we were still successful because we don't have to worry about all these crude oil, competitors popping up. So I'll just stop there.
Just paging through a couple more pictures of stuff we did. That was the big rally out front of City Hall the day of the hearing back in February. And one of the, I think, really cool, special things about this campaign, and I think Nabeehah is going to talk about it a little bit more, is the involvement of artists in the effort. Some of our organizers were artists, and we worked really closely with Micah because the train basically runs through one of their buildings. And so being able to have all of these really awesome visuals, like really got the attention of the media and was able to bring in a lot of people to work on the campaign and supported it with their own capacities and skills. So that was a really cool thing. And next, we're going to hear from Faith, who is just finishing up her master's degree at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. She presented her thesis about basement sewage backups on Thursday.
Yep.
Thursday. So good job, Faith. And yeah, thanks.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. It's close to lunch, so I won't show any graphic pictures of basement backup. Oh, okay. Well, just to set it up a little, just to give you a little bit of insight, that's what can happen. But just to give you a little background of the mechanisms of what happens when you have one of these basement backups. Baltimore City's sewer system is extremely old. It's over 100 years old, so that's really key to note is it's not set up to handle climate change and the variability. No sewer system, I believe, in the nation is really able to account for those changes that we will see. But just to give you a little insight into the sewer system, Baltimore City has a separated sewer system, also called a sanitary sewer system, which means that stormwater, so anything that comes from the street through storm drains or like your house gutter, is going to feed into a storm sewer line, whereas anything that goes down your drain or that you flush is going to go into a separate, also called like the sanitary line. So that's where all the sewage from your house and from business is going to go towards. So how does rain impact those things, considering they're separated? So since gravity, there can be cracks in these pipes. So that speaks to the age. So that it can drip down into the other line and can overfill this, which will lead to a backup. So you have more water, more pressure, which is going to back up into your house, which we all know is extremely hazardous. It will expose you to viruses, bacteria, pathogenic helminths. So you need to suit up to about hazmat level at least in order to protect yourself. So that's something that I really thought was interesting is the city adequately addressing this issue, considering there's residents have to clean it up themselves or pay out of pocket to address this issue. So one of the things that I did as my project was to look at where these basement backups are occurring. Just to note, this is about 5,000 points. This is only fiscal year quarter 1 through 4 of 2018. The fifth quarter is out on their website, but it was out too late for me to do analysis. So we're seeing they're spread throughout the city. To note, there are some gaps. Some of those are accounted for due to just geographic location. So there's parks and cemeteries that obviously wouldn't have reports of basement backups because there's no houses. But it's just important to say that they're happening all over the city and at different amounts. And all this data, just to say, is from 311 data reported from the city. So it's all publicly available, but I just wanted to have a good sense of where it's happening to see if there are any disparities or any resources that need to be allocated to certain communities.
If I can add, it is publicly available, and the city's required to make it available by the consent decree, but they make it available in the form of a PDF spreadsheet.
Yes. Yeah.
The least helpful possible.
Yeah, it was definitely, I coded all of the locations using ArcGIS online and ArcMap, and having to convert everything PDF to an Excel file, definitely a challenge, and took a lot of time just to get it into a format that was able to do this kind of analysis. And so one of the analyses that I did was looking at population, so demographics. So just to kind of walk you through the map first, the darker the color is going to be a higher percentage of Black or African American per census tracts is what, if you can kind of see the barriers, that's the squares. It's going to be 2010 census tracts. And then the blue dots that you're going to see are going to be representative of counts. Doing regression analysis, we found that in more African American or Black census tracts, there was a positive correlation with more basement backups compared to those of not those communities. Just to note, this isn't a comprehensive analysis. We only controlled for number of residential housings in those areas, elderly population, education. But I think it does speak to areas that we may need to look at and to get into the community and to see how they may need resources that other communities may not have, or just to listen and have these conversations. I had the pleasure to go to a meeting in Violetville and to kind of hear their concerns and if they believe that the Expedited Reimbursement program is helping them and is allowing them to, to thrive even when they're having these kind of issues, which is not really the case currently. But I hope that looking at some of these areas, we can advocate and really go into these areas and listen to the stories and the things that they have to say. But thank you. And I hope that we can all, help them and that my analysis will be able to be useful for them. Yeah.
And then finally, Nabeehah Azeez is the operations manager, right, at the No Boundaries Coalition in West Baltimore, and also with me a member of the steering committee of the Baltimore Peoples Climate Movement. I'll page through some of the pictures we've got.
Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Nabeehah Azeez, and she's struggling on my title because I just switched to a brand new job about 2 weeks ago. Formerly, I was with Communities United, and that's where I first started to become involved with the Baltimore Peoples Climate Movement, and really was a founding member along with Jennifer. And also, Jennifer didn't mention, but she has worked on all of these campaigns and all of these pieces of work, which is why she's able to jump in and give us. So Baltimore Peoples Climate Movement, here is a beautiful picture of us in DC at our first mobilization, which we kind of see as the anniversary sort of our founding. But we are a decentralized, leaderful group of organizations, activists, residents, all working to build the new energy and economic future by undoing environmental racism in Baltimore. Our table partners meet regularly to support each other in our collective struggles by directing energies towards our ongoing work. And I'm actually going to just read a little bit from our website just about our history. Just because I want to be mindful of the time, so I'm just going to read so that it is I don't belabor any points. But we started in February of 2017 when a group of different organizations, activists, artists, faith leaders, just a very diverse group of folks all came together. Originally, we were coming to mobilize for the Baltimore table of the People's Climate Movement, and we decided that our first meeting we were going to mobilize around the 2017 People's Climate March, which took place in Washington, D.C. We thought that it would be a catalyst for bringing together formerly disconnected organizations, issues, and campaigns into an intersectional climate justice movement for Baltimore. Not necessarily to launch any new campaigns, and just as a point, we don't take positions on legislation, and what it does is it actually makes us a more beneficial place for organizations to come and partner with us, but it also allows us to coexist without having to fight or be upset that you're signing on this point and we're opposed, we support this piece of legislation. So we don't have to disagree on legislative points, but people who come and introduce ideas to us, instead of getting, so say if you want a sign-in or support for a campaign, instead of getting the Baltimore Peoples Climate Movement to sign on, you might get 20 different organizations to sign on. So it's actually a more beneficial stance because you get a sampling from all of these different types of organizations in Baltimore City. After the mobilization in April of 2017, we continued to be linked together, all of these different organizations, and our coalition grew to over 25 organizations. They represent communities centered on faith, on labor, criminal justice, workers' rights, fair development, environmental protection, public health, students, transit equity, economic justice, and more. And at our second meeting, what we decided was our purpose, as I read a little bit earlier, is that we are building the new energy and economic future by undoing environmental racism. After our first meeting, we were about 3 months out from the original mobilization in Washington, D.C., which took place on April 29th of 2007. And we just continued to work together and move through. And so she's been flashing a whole bunch of different pieces of art from different things that we participated in. Offshore wind, art exhibit that took place both here in Baltimore as well as, well, not here, but in Baltimore as well as in the Eastern Shore. We had an exhibit and displayed art pieces in both locations. This was at one of our teach-ins about the what we can expect, the cost of climate change. So a first part where we kind of brought people in to really see and understand how climate change will affect us, and the differences in the variation of degrees. This is at an art build, and so she mentioned earlier the art. When we did the original mobilization in April, we built so much art. We had a lot of artists and a lot of different ideas. And when we were building the art, our goal was to make art that all of the different organizations and coalition partners could continue to use on and on and on. So there were crabs, there were row houses that talked about housing justice. There were, things that talked about just letting us grow up, that, art that I used in the school with some of my students. And so the point was, we have all of these art pieces that all of the different organizations, whenever they're having an event or mobilization, they can come and say, hey, can I borrow the row houses for our housing event? Or, hey, can we borrow all the crabs for our clean water event? Or, hey, can we borrow the windmills for our air event? All of those different things, and the art continues to live on and on and on and on. This is me, and that baby who looks exactly like me and is not my child, Nabeehah. I was babysitting her that day, and Casey up there. This was at our next big mobilization that we did in September 8th of last year, right out in front of City Hall, which was, we thought was really symbolic and important, that right outside of City Hall we had this huge climate justice mobilization on climate, jobs, and justice. More art. This was the first of a series of town halls that we have been, Communities United has really been working on, and we partnered with the Baltimore Peoples Climate Movement for the first one on redefining public safety. And what those town halls did was they looked at how we're spending our money. They're based off of a 2017 report called the Freedom to Thrive report that was written by the Center for Popular Democracy, BYP 100, and Law for Black Lives. And it looked at how we are spending money in the Baltimore City budget on policing versus other things that help our communities to grow and to thrive. And I mean, you know, we're spending, for every dollar we're spending on policing, we're spending about a penny on solutions to the opioid crisis, 51 cents on education, and the numbers just get worse and worse and worse. More art. I mean, the art is just so beautiful, and we really wanted to spotlight it because it's just such an important part of how we get our messaging out. And I know a lot of times when you're thinking of how you can get involved in some movements, you think, yo, I can go to a government meeting or sit through a legislative hearing or go to a rally or something. But art is so important because when people see those visuals, they automatically can understand what you're trying to get across. And so it can be so powerful and so simple, but it still helps to grow your message.
Yeah, that was the
Yeah.
last one. Is there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my introduction.
So we I think spent a little bit longer on this first section than we expected, but that's okay because this was all really great. And we've got about 10 minutes left. So instead of me like guiding the panel discussion, maybe the better thing to do is just open it up to questions. Like, is there anything in particular that really sparked your interest or any connections that anybody in the audience saw between these different issues that you want to tease out more? Yeah.
I had a question about the consent decree for the sewage backup. So I understand this part of the reimbursement is a small part of the consent decree, right? What's the main need of the consent decree? Are they building a sewage treatment plant? Are they increasing the plant? What are the timelines?
I mean, there are a lot of aspects. There are a lot of components of the sewage consent decree. It's a big document. I think that I sort of say the main thrust is that they're required to stop discharging into Baltimore waterways by 2031. And
Well,
I
they were
think
supposed to stop by 2016.
yes.
So what
Consent decrees can be modified.
What can we do to like push for something to happen? Because I mean, paying people for their of course that's the least that they can do, but stopping the thing is what we need to be doing.
There's a big, I think the city's response, I think, would be that there is a big infrastructure project that they're working on called Headworks. You've probably read about it. There's a big sewage treatment plant in Baltimore County, and the pipes going into it are misaligned, and so there's this backup. It's like a 10-mile backup. That's as you would expect. And there's like a 10-mile backup going. So it's a I want to say an $80 million project or something like that. And they're building a whole bunch of infrastructure basically to create like a route around that. And so that's the thing that the city frames as like the solution to all of these problems. It will, create a solution to some of them, but not all the city is in the sewage is in the sewer shed, including some of the ones that Faith showed on her map. The ones in Northwest Baltimore in particular aren't even in the sewer shed for that plant. So, I mean, I think there are some components where the city is switching out pipes. They've got bigger pipes. They're replacing pipes in some place, but I mean, it's a big. It is overall inadequate. I'm not going to try to defend it. It needs a lot of improvement and a lot of focused attention. I'd say to call that to the city's attention.
And I think that this is all of these issues, but really this is one where what Nabeehah was talking about like where is the city deciding to spend its dollars is really germane, because like the city is doing work on the sewage system. They're prioritizing work that will stop overflows into streams, stopping overflows into people's homes, which is a big environmental justice problem. But I mean, with more money, the city could be doing more and prioritizing these other projects while addressing the overflows into the harbor as well. And there's, Nabeehah and I have been both involved in campaigns around the Baltimore City budget. It's very opaque. It's really set up for individual residents not to be able to participate meaningfully in crafting the budget. By the time there are any kind of public hearings about what's going to be in the budget, all of the mayoral departments have already written their budgets. It's already set. There's realistically not going to be any changes. And then DPW in particular, the city's Department of Public Works, is also very, very opaque, and it's difficult to track when repairs are happening and where and which problems they're intended to address. For example, in the neighborhood of Grove Park in northwest Baltimore that has a lot of basement backups and is one of the neighborhoods that's been really organized and involved in this process for years, there's a lack of capacity in the sewer pipes there that causes a lot of these basement backups. And at the last community association meeting I was at, I think in February, DPW had staff there to share that they would be starting a sewer shed repair process for that neighborhood this summer. And like, that's great. That will probably solve a lot of the basement backup problems, even if it creates some while the repair process is going on, because that is a thing that happens a lot. Actually, that had just happened that week, come to think of it. There had been some minor sewer repair work going on, and residents told me that, I forget what it was, I think that some pumping equipment had either been left on all weekend when it shouldn't have been, or was turned off all weekend when it should have been on, and that caused a lot of backups. So that's very concretely the city or the contractor's fault, but that's exactly the kind of backup that's been written out, excluded from the reimbursement program. I think I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but just to say, that repair work was originally supposed to happen last decade for this project in Grove Park, and the lack of investment into these programs, the lack of transparency about DPW's budget means that these things have kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed since 2002.
Can I just jump in and also say, the federal government and the state government should also be helping the city. The city shouldn't have to bear the financial burden alone. It is a really significant amount of money to get this right. I'm sorry, Jennifer, go.
No, it's
I
good.
should be calling on people.
Ruth Alice?
Following what you just said, Leah, should the state be involved? And if so, how is this happening in other jurisdictions? Should there be a look from the state legislature at the overall problem?
The state is already involved as a regulator, as exercising oversight. The way that the consent decree came about was that the EPA and the Maryland Department of the Environment sued Baltimore City over violations of the Clean Water Act, and then this consent decree is basically a settlement agreement among those parties. So they are involved already in some sense, and I was not privy to the conversations behind the recent modification, but I would guess the Maryland Department of the Environment played some role in improving that. In terms of what else the state can do, though the state has given some money to Baltimore City for this, but I do think it needs to be prioritized much more at both the state and the federal level, probably assuming there's a different government at some point, a different administration at the federal level. But yeah, it's not prioritized, I don't think, significantly at either level.
Mm-hmm. And to piggyback on that too, I think that the role that the state versus the city should be playing really overlaps with both the sewage issue and the crude oil trains issue. Because like Keisha mentioned, the prohibiting new terminals from being built was really the maximum action that the city could do. The city doesn't have any authority to regulate what can come through, what cargo can come through on trains, regulate what safety measures need to be on those trains, whether it's shielding or better brakes, regulate how many crew members need to be on the trains, because only having one crew member on the train has been the cause or a contributor to many derailments and explosions that have happened, and that's a big worker safety and labor problem too. And some of those things, yeah. So some of those aspects, like the shielding and the application of electronic braking systems, are things that the state can't regulate. But some of the number of crew issue is something the state can regulate, and so there has been legislation at least the past 2 years to require at least 2 crew members to be on trains passing through Maryland that carry hazardous freight, and that legislation hasn't moved forward. And much earlier on, I think in the 2015 legislative session, we worked with Delegate Leah to try to have maybe 2016, yeah. Yeah, to increase the fee that's assessed when you transfer oil in the state of Maryland, to raise funds for more safety measures for rail, like better warning systems, better guards at grade rail crossings where somebody you can sit at those at grade rail crossings for 20 minutes sometimes because the trains move so slowly, and so people dodge around them, and it's very easy to do. Those are some of the most likely spots for a derailment to happen. And just none of this legislation about crude oil trains has passed at the state level the past couple of years, which is a big problem. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, or.
No, I mean, I think it's because it's a state issue. Now you're counting on people who either don't know much about Baltimore, don't like Baltimore, to really care about. You're relying on leaders from, say, and I'm not picking on Garrett or Somerset, the furthest ends, or whoever's on the committee, to really pay attention to something that is happening. What is it, about 125,000 people in a city? It's like, in the grand scheme of other things, it just hasn't been considered a priority. So I'm trying to keep my feelings in, but it's hard when it goes above the local level, because there's I can't vote out the guy in Allegheny County or the woman, but I could put pressure on the elected officials here, even if I just tweet bad about them, which I haven't done that, but it just a consequence.
Yeah.
What will it, to your point, what will it take for them to bring awareness to it?
An accident. An accident, and you don't want that to happen, especially, never mind the fact that I live 1 block away. Right now, my fire department is closed because of lead and asbestos and some other issues. So now I have a fire department coming in Brooklyn, which is just above Curtis Bay, but it's about 10 minutes away. You have to cross a train to get in out of most of our neighborhoods in South Baltimore. In Mount Winans, you're not coming and going without a train track. So add the fact that something 3 weeks ago, something happened. Derailment in Mount Winans. And fortunately, with our single engine, it took more than just our fire station. But it's a matter of getting there. And I didn't get notified. I found out through it. I was on the phone running my mouth, and then I hung up, and then Citizens app started going off. But by then, most of the neighborhoods weren't even notified. But people who lived in Roland Park, people who lived in Hamilton, far other ends of the city or state knew about this. But the ones, because again, most of us are not. I have a smartphone. My neighbors has it, but they may not download many more apps other than Facebook, Instagram, stuff, Snapchat, or whoever. You didn't know if you didn't see it, or it was just so close because some of the house in my neighborhood, like this is the wall, that's the train tracks. It's just that close, and it may even be closer. So some people really saw it and got freaked out because that's just how close. So unfortunately, I hate to sound graphic and morbid, but an accident, because when that happened, then all of a sudden people start making calls, or are you okay, or and I think, or I contribute that to the bills and the work we've been doing, because the picture with the no blast. So even though that wasn't crude oil, we didn't know what hexane is or was. Like, is it something we should be concerned about? So, an accident, because unfortunately here, that's how we learn, which is sad, because people die.
Can you tell us again what the group was that does all this artwork?
Oh, this is the Baltimore Peoples Climate Movement. So all of our different members, we have Valeska is one of the people. She's a professor at MICA, but she kind of leads that art
And MICA
cluster.
is, for those of
The
us who-
Maryland Institute College of Art.
Okay.
But she is a member of the Baltimore Peoples Climate Movement, and all of the art is done by us. Even those of us who are not super artistically inclined, I was very proud of my little row house.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so we do it. We have art builds where we invite people from the community and our members to come in and just join us in sessions painting. A lot of the art builds were held at the Black Cherry Puppet Theater. They offered us space to work on a lot of our different art projects, and yeah,
That's great. Great
it's done
work.
by community.
Thanks.
Yes.
So there's a lot of murmur right now of some kind of federal infrastructure bill or package in the future coming out, and I worry a lot that there are so many of these local infrastructure stories that are happening that aren't surfacing in the federal conversation. So are you, like, what are strategies that y'all use or like avenues that you think would be helpful to kind of hear this out to make sure that it's part of the conversation? Not airing out the sewage, obviously, but.
Well, so generally, what the Baltimore Peoples Climate Movement does to educate community on just a bit large array of issues is we hold teach-ins, skills trainings, and forums so that we can help educate our community on what's going on in environmental justice. And when we say environmental justice, we mean it very broadly because there are so many different things that happen to people's in people's lives on a daily basis that they don't consider climate or environmental justice, and it absolutely is. And so that's really how we work, and what our mission is to make sure we're providing opportunities for people. We have done teach-ins or skills trainings on how to do a ballot initiative. If you want to get something passed, you don't want to wait on city council to do it, you can go and you can pass your own ballot initiative, and if you collect your signatures, the mayor can't veto you. So how do you do that? How do you go about doing that? We've had street medics come in and do medic trainings for us. We've talked about the cost of climate change. We've talked about the Baltimore City budget. Like, well, I could go on and on and on. Anti-racism trainings, and so that people can go and actually learn about how they may or may not be playing a role in systemic racism, and so that they can address it within themselves and try to make better decisions in the future and just be more mindful. So all of those things are really important and key components, because legislation is not the end all be all to fixing some of the environmental justice issues that we see. It's really about having communities that are informed and are able to be players when we do get to the point of legislation.
Yes.
I find it so refreshing that you're representing so many groups and you're all able to come together and do good work. I'm working in Jefferson County, West Virginia on an anti-rockwool project, and there are many groups that are operating now, and there are some conflicts that are happening. Could you give us some advice of how to bring people together? Because we all want the same thing, we're all good intentioned, but there's some issues. Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, I guess if you're pulling it up, I can. One thing that that the Baltimore Peoples Climate Movement sort of did as a coalition, like after that initial march in 2017, and we knew that we had something here and we wanted to keep working together, and like, how are we going to do that? So we took some time to come up with backing up a bit, I think that we did benefit from like not being a coalition that was working on urgent legislation or like facing down this urgent threat, because we were really fortunate to like have the chance to take the time to really sit down together and think about like, okay, what is it that brought us together and made us want to bring Baltimore to this national march and really like demonstrate at this march, like, what impact is climate change having on Baltimore and what do we need to do? Like, why did we take the time out of all of our insanely busy schedules to do that? And so we, over a period of a couple of months, really crafted and came to consensus on a platform of value statements about how we wanted to work together, what our priorities were, what we recognized as like the challenges of environmental injustices in Baltimore. and the values that we wanted to bring into that fight. And so we, through like crafting that together and coming up with these statements and really like teasing out where each other were on these things, I think that really helped like educate all of us that were in those conversations about like the different issues that intersect, the different issues in impacting environmental injustice in Baltimore, and where each of us were coming from that and how we wanted to work together. So that was helpful for us, but it is a lot more difficult in a coalition where you're looking at a big polluter or a big looming facility and trying to figure out what strategy to use. Like, that is really hard.
But it sounds like it starts with honest conversations.
Absolutely. So some tips. So first off, our platform is based off the Humanist principles of democratic organizing. So you should, if you are not familiar with it, you should look it up. And it just really talks about how to engage communities without, yes, the Humanist, JEMENEZ, Humanist principles of democratic organizing. And what it talks about how you, if you want to organize, how you approach a community, particularly a community that is not your own community. How do you come in and how do you engage the people who are already there? So that's kind of what we started with when we were thinking of our platform. So second, our platform it covers everything: criminal justice, housing, infrastructure, environmental justice, like all of these key pieces. So when somebody reads our platform, it's really hard for you to not find yourself and your space within that platform. And so many of the organizations don't consider themselves climate justice organizations or environmental justice organizations, but if they are educators and they read the platform piece about schools, they say, oh yeah, I do agree with this platform. This is something that I think is important. So finding common ground would be my second tip, because there's a lot of things we can disagree with, but I think there's more things that we can all agree on. If we're building the community that we want to see, there's a whole lot of things that we all agree. We want a community where people have good jobs. And if we're environmentalists, we want a community where we have green jobs. And if we work in labor, then we are okay with green jobs. So we want to make sure they are great jobs that come with a union and good pay. And so we can agree on those things, even if the environmentalists and labor kind of have some differences of opinions on exactly how to get to that point, right? And so we do have both of those components as a part of the Baltimore Peoples Climate Movement. My next tip is to focus on the education, because we already know this. The things that divide us the most is that I don't really understand what it is that she's doing or trying to do. But if I can be educated on what her issue is, then I can say, oh, I agree with that. I thought that she was doing something different, but really, I can agree with at least 60% of what she's saying. So education is probably is my next biggest tip.
So like your allies and also the public?
Yes. I mean, so I'm a community organizer. That's what I do. And we talk a lot about who your friends are, who your enemies are, and who your frenemies are. Because we might, depending on what room we are in, right, we might be complete opponents. But in a different space, we can actually ally and see common ground in the work that we're trying to do and the things that we're trying to accomplish. So take a look at the Humanist principles for democratic organizing so you can see how to best ingrain yourself in the communities you're trying to impact, find common ground, and lead with education.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes.
General question, I guess it's pointed to Ms. Allen. How did you find a way to build capacity within your community to protect itself and then to advocate for itself?
I think because I'd already been president for a couple of years, I guess had enough name recognition or relationships with people to not necessarily dismiss me. I did not have a lot of neighbors because it's just, I think I shared in the last thing that, for me, I don't know, it's been a long day. Two similar tracks at the same time. People don't have time. and they care and they want to care, but you know, if it takes you 2 hours to get home because the bus is just ridiculous, or you're raising great grandkids because the grandparents and the parents aren't doing their job. I'm just giving you the worst case scenario. That is not everybody in my neighborhood, but it's hard to get people to care, or they. Well, can you do it? You know what you're doing. You got it, girl.
Yeah.
You know, you get that. I really did not. It was maybe me, James, one of my neighbors, Doug. I want to say 3 or 4 of us in my neighborhood, and then like Ms. Robinson who was moving. So there's maybe in the next neighborhood another 2. So we use a lot of Jennifer. Like I'm not going to necessarily create a PowerPoint slide or chase the bills. Like, okay, I can find it and email it, but some of us couldn't do that. Like she could really, like, Keisha, we know you work and you're doing all this. Here's the bill. So it's also partnering with organizations. Once you gain that trust, because I'll be honest, when you live in neighborhoods that are very vulnerable, you also assume people are coming for you for different reasons. Like you want to scare me about an oil train, but the reality is there's 50 acres of land that's waterfront on the other side of the train tracks. So you're trying to scare me out. You know, you have to look at those things. So it's probably tied to your question. They've got to know that you're real and that you don't have a hidden agenda and that you're just not that enemy that Nabeehah just spoke about. So often it's not going to be a lot of people, but that shouldn't stop you. Do what you can as one person. If you get a second person in on it, it really came down to support letters, Twitter, and I would say Twitter or social media under your community organization, not always under your own, but to see that, because that kind of gives you a capacity. It kind of makes it look a little bigger than what it is, but you know what you can handle. So you're probably not going to have 20 people. I mean, in the case of Curtis Bay, they had United Workers. You know, they had an army, and then we got together with them because we all kind of knew each other anyway. So maybe not the answer you're looking for, but it's usually not going to be a lot of people. But do what you can and use the influence that you have. And it takes time. Don't expect us to turn around in 36. If it does, great, tell me about it. But it takes time.
Yeah, I think it was 3.5 years from when Targa, like when we first started finding out about Targa to when we actually, the first terminal proposal, to when we actually had built up the political capacity to pass that bill was close to 4 years.
So you figure Destiny and Charles and the United Workers were in high school. They may have been 11th to 12th grade. And I guess they're probably about 24, 25 now. And you know, college, or if they were, just out of college. So that's what, 5, 6 years or so? Yeah. So it I just want me that we're high schoolers, and now they put on this big show last month, and I'm like, look at y'all grown now. So it's you do what you can, and also what helped too, Jennifer, was those signs, the yellow, the Blackstone signs. Because one of my neighbors still has it in her window. So and I don't even know where mine is, to be honest with you. So but it was
that's a funny thing because we got these signs that were big yellow, corrugated plastic, yard signs that said no bomb. I forget what they actually said.
It's on one jump slot,
but those actually came to us from a community group in California on the West Coast that had just successfully won their campaign against their crude oil terminal, because this is something that's happening in all of the port towns really across the country. And so they just put out on this national listserv, hey, who's still fighting this and wants all our leftover signs? And I think that was another real benefit to that campaign, was having this national network of groups that were all fighting this at the same time, and could connect us with people like Marilyn to come down from Quebec and really build out that international coalition that's working on this at the local level in different spots. And Nabeehah, I know you were trying to say something.
Yeah, she just made me think of another tip for coalition building. Get your pen. No, just stay in your lane and encourage other people to stay in theirs. And that's really important. The purpose or the benefit of coalitions is that you don't have to know everything and you don't have to do everything. That's why we partner with all of these amazing, smart experts, all of those things. Because I'm not going to be the best person for all of the climate justice stuff, but if we're doing organizing or we're going to do some grassroots stuff, I'm the person who should be called. I'm not an artist, But I know that when we're ready to do art, I call Valeska and I call Taylor because they're the artists. And that means that's something that I don't have to do. And it makes all of our loads easier. So stay in your lane, know what you're good at, and encourage other people to find what they're good at, and then use people within their skill set.
Okay, got a few minutes left. One last question.
One last question. So, can you talk about the power of social media? Do you guys use Facebook Live or anything like that to help for the people, for community meetings, for grandma who can't make it because she has to take a 2-hour bus to get there? She can watch it on her phone and be right there and be interactive. So do you guys like use Facebook Live or anything like that to kind of help?
I did it once and a neighbor did it, but it's inconsistent because it depends on who's at the meeting. When even at 43 years old, I'm like often the baby in the room in a lot of places. It's not that our seniors don't use social media, but like to do that and live and it's a lot. So I don't have enough younger kids involved as much as I wish. But yes, but just to doing what we've been doing, Facebook Live I don't think was quite around when we were really taking off. That's more of a newer thing. But I did take pictures. So like I was sitting in traffic coming home from work and took the picture of the trains above. So do things like that. Some communities do it live or at least take photos, update your status. Or if my phone starts ringing off that weekend after the meeting, Keisha, what happened? Or I'll call people like, no, you're gonna call me. This is what happened. And we don't have enough events, but I will tell you that neighborhood events is a really good place to really get community people in. It's almost like the ideal neighborhood association now, except, with the 4th week and stuff. But it's really complex. Some people get their information all kinds of ways, but the visuals do help. And that's how we really did get some neighbors to really get involved was once you see the train, once you see Latin Antique and you see that photo, those visuals help. But I try with Facebook Live, but I'm one where I feel like I'm always the one doing it and I can't moderate and walk around. It's just I can't on the phone. It's too much. But ideally, yes, I would say do it if you have the capacity to do it.
Then I think just to wrap things up, one final question for anybody who's got thoughts like what would we're at this symposium with people from all across the state working on environmental justice issues, and like if there was one thing that you wanted people to take away about what's going on in Baltimore, what has happened in Baltimore, like what would you want like to be the message taken away about this work that we've been doing?
I think for mine especially, since mine was really creating awareness in this gap, would be creating more awareness. And also, this is a conversation we're gonna have to start having in other cities as well. I'm from Ohio, and this was an issue in Cincinnati. And they also handled, and it still is an issue. And they have a different sewer system, but they have some of the same struggles. So just knowing that this is a conversation we're gonna have to have, and it's not gonna go away. Basement backups are not gonna, be fixed, and there'll be none in the country. It's something, especially with weather variability, you can create a bigger pipe, but the more intense rainfall we're gonna have, you can't, just keep changing the pipes out. So it's a conversation we have to have. So I think just making sure that we're having those conversations and we're letting communities know, well, what's actually happening and how can we be involved.
I would probably say to think about the intersectionality of issues that you're concerned about and be mindful of all of the communities that are going to be impacted, particularly those that will be impacted first and those will be impacted most severely, and leading with people from those communities, because people know the solutions to their own issues, and a lot of times we want to go higher to try to find solutions, but we should go to the people most impacted.
I think mine would probably be just building off of what Nabeehah was saying about the value of staying in your lane in terms of coalition building. Everything that we consider like a real success in our work in Baltimore it's been the result of a coalition. People don't really build power just by themselves. You need a lot of folks to really have victories. And I do think, as somebody who does legal work and data crunching and that kind of thing, thing. I think it's been really valuable for us to understand that, like, we don't do community organizing, and we shouldn't try to speak for communities. And so, I'm fortunate to work with community organizers, who work with Jennifer, who works directly with affected residents, and I think that's a really, really valuable way to work together with other folks.
Keisha, any thoughts?
No, I think I said a lot. But I just appreciate everyone who's listening, and I just appreciate you all who are doing a similar work, because when you're in a community on the ground level, you just assume it's just you. I didn't realize that there were so many people from like Jefferson County, West Virginia, which is not far from Baltimore, an hour, so give or take, but that these things are just not happening in your own neighborhood, they're happening all over the place. And that we seem to get stuck, or not stuck, but get delayed in the same areas. Just seems like it feels good to know that you're not by yourself. So.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming out.